In the glittering ballroom of the Lancaster Grand, beneath crystal chandeliers casting golden light across marble floors, everyone turned away when Evelyn Lancaster stood alone by a stone pillar. Nathan Carter, a waiter and single father, set down his silver tray and extended his hand to her. Whispers erupted through the crowd. The band began to play. And it was exactly the song from that burning stage night, buried for 7 years. Henry Lancaster, the cold-eyed CEO, froze in place. The dance began, and with each step, his carefully hidden secrets were dragged into the light. The Lancaster Charity Gala was the kind of event that defined power in the city. 300 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits moved through the ballroom like pieces on a chessboard, each placement calculated, each conversation an investment. Nathan Carter navigated between them with practiced invisibility, balancing champagne flutes on a silver tray, his broad shoulders and steady hands making the work look effortless. At 36, he had the kind of presence that should have commanded attention, but he had learned to move like a shadow through these gilded spaces. Against the far wall, partially hidden behind a marble column, Evelyn Lancaster watched the crowd with eyes that had once sparkled on stage. 24 years old, with golden hair pulled low at her neck, she wore a midnight blue dress that covered her from throat to floor. The right side of her face bore the permanent memory of flames, scars that traced from her temple to her jaw like a map of pain. 7 years had passed since she had been the city's most promising young dancer, and now she stood at her father's gala like a ghost at her own funeral. Henry Lancaster commanded the center of the room with the magnetic pull of money and influence. At 58, he wore his power like armor, every silver hair precisely placed, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. As CEO of Lancaster Holdings, he had built an empire on the foundation of perfection. His eyes, the same blue as his daughter's but cold as winter steel, swept the room constantly, cataloging allies and threats. When his gaze passed over Evelyn, it moved on without recognition, as if she were merely another piece of furniture. Nathan noticed everything while appearing to notice nothing. It was a skill honed through years of serving the wealthy, of being present but invisible. He saw how Serena Blake, the 42-year-old chief operating officer, managed the event with military precision, her tablet never leaving her manicured hands. He watched Dante Cooper, 39 and head of public relations, work the room with a smile that never reached his eyes. He observed Vivian Moore, the 30-year-old influencer whose camera phone captured every moment, her followers hanging on each image of privilege and excess. But mostly, Nathan watched Evelyn. He had been watching her all evening, seeing how she pressed herself against the pillar when groups passed too close, how her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for her untouched champagne glass. In his jacket pocket, his fingers found the small music box his late wife Amanda had given him years ago. Sometimes it played a few notes unbidden, a ghost of melody that reminded him of dreams deferred and love lost. The evening proceeded with choreographed precision. Henry took the stage to announce the charity's latest initiative, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied. Cameras flashed as he signed donation pledges, each signature another brick in the wall of his legacy. The crowd applauded on cue, their enthusiasm proportional to their proximity to his power. Through it all, Evelyn remained in her corner. A beautiful tragedy everyone pretended not to see. The whispers followed her like shadows. The Lancaster princess with the ruined face, the dancer who would never dance again, the daughter who had become her father's shame. 7 years ago, the Riverside Theater had been packed for the Youth Ballet Company's season premiere. Evelyn Lancaster had been the star, her name on every poster, her future written in headlines waiting to be printed. The stage had been set with elaborate scenery, painted forests that would transform with light into magical kingdoms. She had been in her dressing room when the first wisps of smoke appeared, barely noticeable in the excitement of opening night. The fire started in the lighting rig, a perfect storm of faulty wiring and ignored safety protocols. Corbin Hayes, the 50-year-old stage engineer, had filed 3 separate reports about the substandard equipment. Each report had been buried under budget concerns and timeline pressures. The sprinkler system had been deactivated for maintenance that was never completed. The fire exits had been partially blocked by set pieces. Every shortcut taken in the name of profit had led to that moment when the flames dropped from above like judgment. Evelyn had been rushing to help a younger dancer when the burning backdrop collapsed. The synthetic material melted as it fell, adhering to her skin with cruel permanence. The right side of her face took the worst of it, the heat so intense it destroyed nerve endings, leaving some parts mercifully numb, while others screamed with endless pain. Her hands, trained to express emotion through movement, were burned trying to shield herself. Henry Lancaster had arrived at the hospital with a team of lawyers before the doctors had finished their initial assessment. While his daughter lay sedated, her body fighting infection and shock, he was already controlling the narrative. The story that emerged in the press was sanitized, simplified, an unfortunate accident, no one to blame. The theater's insurance would cover medical expenses. The Lancaster family requested privacy during this difficult time. What the public never learned was that Henry had personally approved the budget cuts that eliminated safety upgrades. His signature was on the documents that Corbin Hayes had tried to contest. The theater was one of Lancaster Holdings' charitable investments, a tax write-off that was never supposed to require actual attention. Henry buried the investigation, paid off inspectors, and ensured that the official report blamed a perfect storm of unforeseeable circumstances. Nathan knew none of this history as he worked the gala, but he recognized pain when he saw it. His wife Amanda had died of cancer 3 years ago, a long battle that had drained their savings and their dreams. He had been offered a tour with a jazz quartet just before her diagnosis, the break he had been working toward since college. Instead, he had stayed home, learned to braid his daughter Lily's hair, and taken whatever work would pay for treatments that ultimately failed. Now he played piano in hotel bars and served champagne to people who spent more on a single bottle than he made in a month. The gala continued its predetermined course. The band, led by Finn Morgan, played safe standards that wouldn't disturb conversation or digestion. 35 and classically trained, Finn had his own dreams deferred, conducting wedding bands when he had once imagined symphony halls. Serena Blake supervised every detail, checking with him repeatedly about the playlist, emphasizing certain songs to avoid. Nothing too melancholy, nothing that might remind anyone of tragedy or loss. Nothing from the Riverside Theater's final season. The younger guests, friends of friends who attended these events for the open bar and networking opportunities, had discovered Evelyn's corner. Their whispers weren't as subtle as they believed, voices carrying over the ambient music. "She used to be beautiful," one woman said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Such a shame about the fire. I heard she never leaves the house. Why would her father bring her here? It's cruel to parade her around like this." Vivian Moore had started a live stream, her phone sweeping the room as she provided commentary to her followers. She avoided pointing the camera directly at Evelyn, but made sure to capture her in the background. A figure of tragedy adding depth to the glamorous scene. The contrast would drive engagement, she knew. Beauty and Beast in the same frame always did. Henry took the stage again for his keynote address, and this time, something shifted in his prepared remarks. He had been planning to speak about the importance of charitable giving, but standing there, seeing his daughter in his peripheral vision, he changed course. "Beauty," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "is more than surface deep. But we live in a world that demands perfection. Lancaster Holdings has always stood for excellence, for the highest standards in everything we do. We cannot accept anything less than the very best." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading through the crowd. Evelyn's hand tightened on her champagne glass, her knuckles white with pressure. She had learned to armor herself against stares and whispers, but her father's words cut through every defense. To him, she had become the embodiment of imperfection, a living reminder of standards not met. Nathan was moving through the crowd when he saw Evelyn's hand begin to shake. The champagne glass trembled, golden liquid threatening to spill. He changed direction without thought, drawn by an instinct older than protocol. His supervisor would reprimand him later for abandoning his station, but in that moment, he saw only a young woman drowning in a sea of judgment. The band had paused between songs, Finn Morgan conferring with Serena about the next selection. She held a typed playlist, but someone had placed another sheet on the music stand, handwritten notes for a different arrangement. Finn frowned, recognizing the melody. It was from the Riverside Theater's final production. the very music that had been playing when the fire started. He looked at Serena, who had gone pale. Nathan reached Evelyn just as the first notes began to play. The piano introduction was haunting, a melody in minor key that seemed to pull shadows from the corners of the room. Without speaking, without asking permission, he set down his tray on a nearby table and extended his hand to her. The ballroom fell silent except for the music. 300 pairs of eyes turned to watch the waiter in his simple black uniform stand before the scarred daughter of their host, his hand outstretched in invitation to dance. It was a breach of every social protocol, a crossing of boundaries that these people had spent their lives reinforcing. Evelyn looked at his hand, then up at his face. Nathan's eyes were warm brown, steady and without pity. He didn't look away from her scars, didn't let his gaze drift to safer territory. He simply waited, his hand patient in the space between them. She shook her head slightly, a lifetime of hiding making the refusal automatic. But then movement at the service entrance caught her eye. 7-year-old Lily Carter peeked around the door, her babysitter trying to pull her back. The little girl waved enthusiastically at Evelyn, her smile bright and encouraging. Lily had been watching from the kitchen, where her aunt worked as a prep cook, and she had seen the pretty lady in the blue dress standing all alone. Something in that child's smile, so free of calculation or judgment, gave Evelyn the courage to move. She set down her glass with deliberate care and placed her hand in Nathan's. His fingers were warm and steady, calloused from years of work but gentle in their grip. The melody continued, building slowly, and Nathan led her toward the center of the floor. The crowd parted like a biblical sea, some in shock, others in scandalized delight at the unprecedented breach of etiquette. Whispers rose like a tide, but Nathan kept his eyes on Evelyn, his hand firm at her waist as they found their position. "You can dance as yourself," he said quietly. His voice meant only for her. Nothing more, nothing less. The music swelled, and muscle memory older than trauma took over. Evelyn's body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The first steps were hesitant, her legs uncertain after years of stillness. But Nathan was a surprisingly skilled partner, his lead clear but not overwhelming. He had learned to dance with Amanda during her good days, when the chemotherapy hadn't left her too weak to stand. He knew how to support without controlling, how to create space for his partner to find her own strength. They began to move together, and it was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. Evelyn's spine straightened, her arms found their grace, and for a moment, the scars on her face seemed to disappear, replaced by an expression of pure concentration and growing joy. The melody wrapped around them, achingly beautiful and terribly familiar. Henry Lancaster stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his face draining of color as recognition dawned. This was the exact music from that night, the waltz that had been playing when the fire alarms first sounded. He had buried every recording, had paid to have the sheet music destroyed, had done everything in his power to erase this melody from existence. Yet here it was, filling his ballroom, accompanying his daughter as she danced with a servant. "Stop this," he said. But his voice was lost in the music. He stepped forward, then hesitated, aware of the cameras, of Vivian Moore's phone streaming live, of 300 witnesses to whatever came next. Dante Cooper was at his side instantly, hissing urgently about containing the situation, about the narrative they would need to construct. But Serena Blake was staring at the dancers with something like wonder, her tablet hanging forgotten at her side. Even she, master of control and protocol, seemed mesmerized by the transformation taking place on the dance floor. Nathan guided Evelyn through a complex turn, and her muscle memory responded perfectly. 7 years fell away like shed skin. She was no longer the hidden daughter, the family shame, the tragedy to be whispered about. She was a dancer, and she was dancing. The music built toward its crescendo, the melody soaring with a mixture of sorrow and defiance that seemed to tell the entire story without words. "Stop this immediately." Henry's voice finally cut through the music, amplified now by the microphone he had grabbed from the podium. "This is inappropriate. You," he pointed at Nathan, "are an employee of this establishment. You have no right to." Evelyn stopped dancing but didn't let go of Nathan's hand. She turned to face her father, and when she spoke, Her voice carried a strength that had been buried under 7 years of silence. "I'm tired of asking permission to exist," she said, each word clear and deliberate. "I'm tired of hiding, so you don't have to see what your choices cost. I'm tired of being your shame." The ballroom held its collective breath. Vivian Moore's camera captured every second, the viewer count climbing exponentially as words spread through social media that something extraordinary was happening at the Lancaster gala. Henry's face flushed red, his controls slipping like sand through his fingers. "Turn off that music," he commanded Finn Morgan. The bandleader looked at his musicians, then at Serena Blake, who stood frozen with indecision. After a long moment, Finn raised his baton again, and the music continued. It was a choice that would cost him this job, he knew, but some moments demanded choosing art over commerce, truth over comfort. Henry strode onto the dance floor, his hand reaching for Nathan's shoulder with the clear intention of physically removing him. But Nathan moved with surprising grace, guiding Evelyn in a smooth rotation that avoided the contact while maintaining the rhythm of the dance. It was elegant and devastating, a servant evading his master without ever appearing to fight. The crowd began to murmur more loudly now, the sound building like thunder. Some were appalled at the breach of social order. Others were captivated by the drama unfolding before them. A few, those who had their own hidden scars and untold stories, watched with tears in their eyes as Evelyn reclaimed something that had been stolen from her. "You don't understand what you're doing," Henry said, his voice cracking with desperation. He had moved beyond anger into something more primal, the fear of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. "You're humiliating yourself. You're humiliating our family." The word "our" hung in the air like an accusation. Evelyn had not been our family when Henry had refused to be photographed with her for 3 years. She had not been our family when he had introduced her to business associates as having a chronic illness that prevented her from attending social functions. She had been erased from our family the moment her face no longer fit his definition of perfection. In his desperation, Henry made a fatal error. Forgetting that his microphone was still active, forgetting that hundreds of phones were recording, he let his true feelings escape. "That scarred face is an embarrassment," he snarled. "Every time I look at you, I see my failure. The failure of that theater. The failure of safety protocols I approved. You're a walking reminder of what happens when standards slip. I've spent 7 years and millions of dollars trying to bury what happened that night, and you insist on wearing it on your face for everyone to see." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the music faltered, Finn's hands freezing mid-conducting as the full weight of the confession settled over the room. Henry seemed to realize what he had said, his eyes widening as he saw Vivian Moore's camera pointed directly at him, the red recording light like an unblinking eye. Nathan's voice was calm, but carried to every corner of the ballroom. "That night," he said, "the sprinkler system had been deactivated to save money. The fire exits were blocked because storage was needed for set pieces. The electrical system hadn't been upgraded in 15 years despite multiple warnings. Corbin Hayes filed report after report about the dangers, and everyone was rejected because it would have impacted the profit margins." Serena Blake's face had gone white. Dante Cooper was frantically typing on his phone, trying to do damage control that was already impossible. The crowd began to shift restlessly, the social order that had seemed so solid moments before beginning to crack. Henry attempted to regain control. "These are baseless accusations from a waiter who clearly has an agenda. He probably planned this whole stunt for money, for attention, for—" "I have the reports," a new voice said from the service entrance. Corbin Hayes stepped into the ballroom, looking older than his 50 years but carrying himself with the dignity of someone who had waited 7 years to speak the truth. In his hands was a thick folder of documents, original emails, safety assessments, and budget proposals. Everyone has Henry Lancaster's digital signature, authorizing the cuts that made the fire inevitable. Corbin had been invited by Nathan, who had tracked him down after learning fragments of Evelyn's story from kitchen staff, who remembered the night their beloved boss's daughter had been hurt. Nathan had spent weeks putting pieces together, knowing this night would come, knowing someone needed to be ready to catch Evelyn when her father inevitably let her fall again. The crowd erupted in chaos. Guests pulled out phones, not to record but to call lawyers, publicists, board members. The Lancaster Holdings empire, built on an image of perfection and excellence, was crumbling in real time. Several people who had lost money in Lancaster ventures over the years began to speak up, emboldened by the crack in Henry's armor. Stories of crushed competitors, buried reports, and destroyed lives began to surface like bodies in a flood. Through it all, Evelyn and Nathan continued to dance. The music had resumed, Finn conducting with tears streaming down his face as he recognized the power of art to reveal truth. The other musicians played with a fervor they hadn't felt since music school, when they still believed in the transformative power of their craft. Henry stood isolated in the center of his own gala, watching his daughter dance around him like a beautiful ghost of the child he had sacrificed to his ambition. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from board members, but he didn't answer. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as 7 years of carefully constructed lies unraveled in 3 to 4 time. The song was ending, the final notes approaching with inevitable gravity. Nathan guided Evelyn through one last turn, and as she spun, her face caught the light from the chandeliers. The scars that had defined her for 7 years seemed to glow, not with shame but with survival. She was marked, but not broken, changed, but not diminished. As the last note faded, Evelyn turned to face the room. Vivian Moore's camera was still rolling, broadcasting to thousands who had been following the drama. Evelyn looked directly into the lens, knowing her words would travel far beyond this ballroom. "I am not anyone's mistake," she said, her voice carrying the strength of 7 years of silence, finally broken. "This is my face. These are my scars. And I will dance. I've spent 7 years in darkness because someone decided my truth was inconvenient. No more. Tonight, I dance for every person who has been told they need to hide to make others comfortable. We are not your shame. We are not your failure. We are survivors. And we deserve to be seen." The applause started slowly, one person clapping alone in the back of the room. Then, another joined. And another. Soon, the entire ballroom was on its feet, the standing ovation building like a wave. Not everyone was applauding Henry's fall, many were applauding Evelyn's rise, her courage to stand scarred but unashamed in front of people who had been trained since birth to value surface over substance. Lily Carter broke free from her aunt and ran onto the dance floor, throwing her small arms around Evelyn's waist. The little girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a small music box, identical to the one her father carried. She wound the key and held it up to Evelyn. The melody that played was the same waltz they had just danced to, but in the music box's simple notes, it sounded like a lullaby, gentle and healing. "This was Mommy's," Lily said. She said, "Music makes everything better. You can have it." Evelyn knelt down to the child's level, her scarred face close to Lily's perfect one. The contrast should have been jarring, but instead, it was beautiful, two souls recognizing each other across the divide of age and experience. Evelyn accepted the music box with hands that shook, not from fear but from the overwhelming weight of kindness freely given. "Thank you," she whispered. And Lily hugged her again before running back to her aunt. The next morning, the video had been viewed over 10 million times. News outlets picked up the story, each adding their own spin. Financial reporters dug into Lancaster Holdings' history, finding pattern after pattern of cut corners and buried reports. The board called an emergency meeting, and by noon, Henry Lancaster had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Serena Blake, displaying the adaptability that had made her successful, immediately announced a complete restructuring of the company's safety protocols and a victim compensation fund for anyone hurt by Lancaster properties over the past decade. She also, in a gesture that surprised everyone, offered Corbin Hayes a position as head of safety compliance with full authority to override budget decisions. But the real story, the one that would be remembered, happened 3 days later in a small dance studio on the east side of the city. Astrid Cole, the 33-year-old former artistic director of the Riverside Theater's youth company, had reached out to Evelyn through Nathan. She had a confession to make. "I sent the sheet music," Astrid admitted, sitting across from Evelyn in the empty studio. "I've carried guilt for 7 years, knowing I should have fought harder against the safety cuts, should have refused to let the show go on when I knew the risks. When I heard about the gala, I knew it was time for truth. I didn't know if anyone would play it, but I had to try. You deserve to dance to your own song, not the sanitized version your father preferred. Astrid had taken over a small dance academy after the fire, teaching children who couldn't afford the elite schools. She offered Evelyn a position teaching, if she wanted it, not because of pity or publicity, but because she had been the best dancer Astrid had ever trained, and that talent didn't disappear with the fire. Evelyn looked around the small studio, its mirrors reflecting her scarred face from every angle. For the first time in 7 years, she didn't look away. She saw herself fully, the damage and the strength, the loss and the possibility. "I'll teach," she said. "But I also want to dance. Not professionally, maybe, but for myself. For the joy of it." Nathan had been waiting outside, giving them privacy for their conversation. When Evelyn emerged, she was crying but smiling. A combination he recognized from his own journey, through grief to acceptance. He offered her a ride home, but she shook her head. "I think I'll walk," she said. In daylight, without hiding. Over the following weeks, life rearranged itself in unexpected ways. Nathan found a part-time position at the dance academy, managing their sound equipment and playing piano for classes. It allowed him to keep his benefits while spending more time with Lily, who had started taking Evelyn's beginning ballet class. The little girl approached dance with the same joy she brought to everything. Uncoordinated, but enthusiastic. Making Evelyn laugh with her creative interpretations of basic positions. Henry Lancaster faced multiple investigations, both civil and criminal. His empire crumbled piece by piece, each revelation worse than the last. But perhaps the most devastating blow was personal, a letter from Evelyn, delivered by lawyer, stating she wanted no contact until he had undergone substantial therapy and made genuine amends to all the people his negligence had hurt. The letter was not cruel, merely clear. She would not be his path to redemption unless he did the work himself first. The video of the dance became something larger than scandal or vindication. It became a symbol for everyone who had been told to hide their imperfections, to make themselves smaller for others' comfort. Dance studios across the country began hosting inclusive classes, making space for people with disabilities, disfigurements, and differences. The waltz from that night, officially titled "Reflection in Flame," was recorded by the London Symphony Orchestra, with proceeds going to burn victims' support organizations. 6 months later, Henry appeared at one of Evelyn's classes. He stood in the doorway, diminished and gray, watching his daughter teach a group of young children. One little girl had a prosthetic leg. Another boy had birthmarks covering half his face. Evelyn treated them all the same, with patience and encouragement, helping them find grace in bodies the world had labeled imperfect. When the class ended, Henry approached slowly. He didn't speak, didn't try to explain or justify. He simply stood before his daughter and, for the first time in 7 years, really looked at her. Not at the scars, but at her, the woman she had become despite him, not because of him. "I see you," he said quietly. Finally, "I see you." It wasn't forgiveness that would take years, if it came at all, but it was a beginning. The first honest moment between them since the fire. Evelyn nodded once, acknowledging the words without accepting them as enough. She had learned that healing happened on its own timeline, not anyone else's schedule. 1 year after the gala, the renovated Riverside Theater reopened with a benefit performance. Evelyn stood at center stage. No makeup covering her scars. No shadows to hide in. The lights were bright but properly installed. The exits clear. The sprinkler system state-of-the-art. Corbin Hayes had personally overseen every safety measure. Nathan sat at the piano, his fingers finding the opening notes of a new composition, something he had written during the late nights when Lily slept and memories of Amanda felt closest. It was a piece about transformation, about finding beauty not in perfection but in survival. In the choice to keep going when stopping would be easier. Evelyn began to dance, and the audience held its breath. This wasn't the desperate dance from the gala, born of defiance and pain. This was something else, entirely a celebration of scars as maps of survival, of imperfection as proof of life lived fully. She moved with a grace that transcended conventional beauty, each gesture telling the story of falling and choosing to rise. In the back row, Henry Lancaster stood to applaud. His presence had not been announced, his ticket purchased quietly, his attendance a private act of witness rather than public gesture. He had spent the year in therapy, confronting the shallow values that had cost him his daughter, and very nearly his soul. He was not forgiven, might never be, but he was learning to live with that reality. The performance ended with Evelyn reaching toward the lights above, not in fear but in acknowledgement. Fire had transformed her, marked her, but not destroyed her. She stood in full illumination, scarred and radiant, as the audience rose to its feet. The ovation lasted 7 minutes, one for each year she had hidden, though no one was counting except her. Backstage, Lily ran to Evelyn with the music box, wound and ready. The simple melody played, a thread connecting past to present. Lost to hope, Nathan joined them, his arm around his daughter, his eyes on Evelyn with something that might grow into love, given time and trust. "How was it?" Evelyn asked Lily, kneeling to the child's height. "Perfect," Lily said, then reconsidered with 7-year-old honesty. "Not perfect, actually. Better than perfect. Real." Evelyn laughed, a sound that had been absent for so long that it felt foreign in her throat. But it was real, like Lily said, real and imperfect, and absolutely enough. The music box played on, its melody mixing with the fading applause and the sound of rain beginning to fall on the theater's new roof. Everything was different from 7 years ago, and everything that mattered was exactly as it should be. Not perfect, but real. Not flawless, but whole. In the end, that was the only dance worth doing, the one that honored both the breaking and the mending, the falling and the rise, the scars and the soul beneath them. Evelyn had found her stage again, not as the dancer she had been, but as the one she had become. And in that becoming, she had taught everyone watching that beauty wasn't about the absence of marks but about the courage to be seen, marks and all. The music box clicked closed, its song complete. But in the silence that followed, you could still hear it, the echo of truth finally told, of shame transformed to strength, of a dance that changed everything simply by happening. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ended with something better. The beginning of honestly ever after, scars included, shame excluded, truth the only melody that mattered.